the digital technology change on media has been phenomenal. And for those of us who've worked in media over the last couple of decades, I think we've seen more change than anyone in terms of technology. What we have now, and we couldn't even conceive of what we have now, which is a 360 loop. A 360 loop. The moment government has a message that it somehow disseminates out there, it gets feedback instantly. But more importantly, the audience is incredibly fractured. There are myriad strands to the audience. When I worked at Channel 9, for example, many years ago, we used to talk about the audience, and we had a very clear idea of Maud and Bill and what they watched when they sat down to watch it. That doesn't exist anymore. The audience is completely fragmented, and we can also, though as communication specialists, the advantage of that is we can be very targeted in our communications, and that's something that government comms needs to do but doesn't do nearly as well as it should. We don't do stories on the plane that lands safely. Of course, we'll do a story on the plane that crashes, but we don't do a story on the plane that lands safely. And I was in one government department, and this was before COVID, doing some work with them on the difficult situation they were in with getting their stories heard. And the more I dug, there were some fantastic, amazingly interesting stories that weren't getting out because the poor people in comms had been so browbeaten about believing the public doesn't want good stories. That they do. We do need good stories, but we need to be able to tell them well. And just because you in a siloed position in a government department and you've been working on something for years and it's finally come good and you want to tell the world about it, that doesn't make it a great story for the general public. You have to find a hook. You have to find a way of making it relevant to your neighbour who knows nothing about what you do or why you do it, such that your neighbour will say, did you read about that or did you hear about that? One thing that really amazes me is how government comms underestimates the intelligence and the bullshit radar of citizens. People get it. One is the consumers, media consumers can actually be quite forgiving if you're honest with them. If you stuff up or you get something wrong, as long as you're honest, what they're looking for is authenticity. And we overuse that word. But, the citizens' radar for bullshit and inauthenticity is massively powerful. And a lot of communications fail to appreciate that and fail to acknowledge that and tend to sometimes think of the citizen that they're communicating to like they're robots.
I wonder if I can ask, did you see that recently released video on consent?
You mean the milkshake?
Milkshake. Yes, the milkshake.
Okay. I'm not 13 and I'm not 23, and so I'm a little bit older. I had to watch it twice because I don't understand it. I don't really understand what they're talking about. I thought at first it was a joke, a well-filmed joke, and I was waiting for the credits at the end. I thought it was a parody of something that the government was doing or going to do. I didn't think it was serious. I have read Chantal Conti, the young New South Wales woman who started up a survey about private schools and sexual harassment and assault. And I noticed a comment from her this morning saying, she appreciates that they're trying, government departments are trying, but that it doesn't use the language that young people use. And young people, again, it's like, I talk about we've all got good bullshit radars. They talk about sex and they use the language of sex. They don't need to pretend that it's about a milkshake. I mean, it's silly. It's just plain silly. And it's kind of icky, really. And therefore, they ought to have had the people who designed that campaign include at least half of them ought to have been year 11, 10, 11, 12 students.